Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a review of AP World History, some of the major things you need to know going into the AP World History exam. This is going to be images, pictures, propaganda, maps, anything you can name and think of. This is going to be a good review for you guys to kind of look over. Alright, so first off, you need to know that world history is going to be done in regions or sections. And the sections that they actually cover, again, are not going to be countries per se. They're more geographic regions, such as Central Africa, South Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Latin America, and so forth. You're not going to get the idea of Colombia or China per se, but this is going to help you kind of look at and know what the actual areas are of the time, and also understand that basically this is what you would think of today of Argentina, China, and so forth, but this is basically how it would be termed with the sections of the world that it's covering. All right, so if it's talking about, for instance, Mexico, it would be Central America kind of thing, right? If it's talking about East Asia, it's pretty much talking about China. So those are some of the things that you want to think about when you're going forward. Practice what you know from before, right? The idea of regions. But in reality, look at the ideas of thinking of where these places would be that you know currently, and then how it would fit into the regions of world history from the totality of it. Now, why did they do that to you guys? It's because during this age of world history, these places were not referred to as their countries that you're known today. But that's going to be how you probably easily to identify and understand the general geographic regions that they're going to be talking about. So they'll phrase, South America as referring to what you think of maybe modern day Argentina, right? Or Central America as Mexico, right? Or the Middle East meaning like Iran, right? Or something like that. Or Southeast Asia is referring to India. So those are some of the terms that you kind of want to get used to thinking about going forward, and realizing that that's something that can happen going into history, a world history, okay? This is another kind of round two answers, and this is a PowerPoint that I'll put up on my page. You can kind of look at it to get the general scope of it. This is kind of like what you really need to know. North America is the term for Caribbean, would be anything that you're talking about the age of exploration. North America, they'll be talking about. Central America will be Mexico, Mayans. South America, Inca. Inca over here, right? Here you're going to talk about North Africa. Here, Western Africa would be like the Ivory Coast would be something that's popping up. Europe wouldn't be technically broken down into too many sections because they don't really focus too much on the European sections in world history, but it would be more on, it's usually divided into Western Europe, meaning what you think of modern day Europe, and then Eastern Europe, which you think of like Russia. Then the parts that they really like to go on is Southern Africa, Western Africa, like I said. Then it's South Central Asia. Then there's Southeastern Asia, which is like the areas of Vietnam. Here, South Central Asia would be areas you think of the middle, but pretty much they're talking about India, modern day India. And then Eastern Asia, they're always referring to China. So the ones that I would suggest knowing the difference between are South Central Asia, right? Or South Asia, meaning this area here of India, and Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. We'll talk about that later on. Then you want to break up the ideas of, Northern Africa, Western East Asia here, this area, or the Middle East. The section here is another reference of this time frame here. But those are the general geographic regions. Why do they do this? You don't have to remember every country and capital of every place in the world. That's impossible. So you want to know the general regions and what empires they're talking about when they're talking about the general regions of it, okay? And the oceans, you should know your 4 oceans. So, Ottoman Empire is basically the continuation of the Byzantine Empire. It's the Middle East region, and it's located in this primary area of the Middle East. So anytime they're talking about the Middle East, they're usually referring to the Ottoman Empire, and that's from 1450 to 1922, which is basically your class in general. So anytime they're referring to the Middle East, they're usually referring to the Ottoman Empire, which is driving the Islamic religion of the time, and that would be located in this section here in the middle of the world map that you're looking at, okay? The next one is if they talk about the Mughal Empire, they're also referring to South Central Asia, which are really talking about India. This section here, the Mughal Empire, and the religions that they're talking about in this section would be Hindu and Buddhism. So this is like your main area that you want to think about. Think of India, modern day India. That's what the Mughal or South Central Empire they're talking about. And that those are the words that they would use that to you. They wouldn't say necessarily India in that sense, unless it's something more current history and world history. So more 9 times out of 10 you'll get like a Mughal or South Central Empire. The next would be the Inca, located in South America, modern day Peru. If they're talking about the Inca Empire, they're not talking about Peru. They're talking about Peru, this what you know today, but they're really talking about South America. So they'll say the South America Inca, and they're kind of understanding that you know that they're talking about Peru, what you think of today. So anytime they use either South America or Inca, 9 times out of 10 they're talking about this section here of South America, and over here on the world map that we have here. The next they'll be talking about, if they bring up Mayan Empire, they're pretty much talking about the modern day Central America, the areas of what would be Mexico, places in Nicaragua, Guatemala, Panama, Costa Rica. Those are the things that you're kind of thinking of. And on the world map, it'll be here, Central America here. There'll be Maya or Central America. Just think of modern day Mexico is the greatest reference to think of with what you would know currently. Now, East Asia is the one that you want to know, breaking it down by the dynastic cycle. Some of these dynasties go a little bit before, but they can kind of continue on through the Mongol dynasty, which is important to know. Anytime they're talking about Eastern Asia, you're going to get at least 4 of the biggest dynasties you kind of want to know in the back of your hand. It's the Song dynasty, which was Eastern Asia, modern day China, from this period of time. Remember, it's a cycle, so they stay in the same area, but different people take over, and they're named different dynasties. The Ming dynasty, officially the Great Ming, ruler of China, 1368 to 1644. That was followed by the Mongol Yuan dynasty. So that's the Ming coming in. When it becomes the Yuan dynasty, you know that the Mongols have taken over and basically taken over China and part of this dynastic cycle. Remember, it's a cycle of dynasties coming in and out. So you want to think of things like Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, coming in, the grandson of Genghis Khan, meaning the Khans of the Mongol Empire coming over. And when it's called the Yuan dynasty, you know you're talking about Mongols from 1279 to 1368. And that would be the time frame between these two going forward. It should actually, this is a little bit mixed up in the order, but it would go Song, Yuan, and then it would go to Ming and then Qing dynasty. The last one you would be referencing would be the Qing Eastern Asia, which was the final imperial dynasty from 1644 to 1912. And in this is the last one that you'd be covering. So they say Qing, Yuan, Song, Ming, those 4, those are going to be the ones that you're going to be realizing they're talking about Eastern Asia. And the only time it changes with a dynasty is if it's the Yuan dynasty. That's why I had it there, I think, is that it's basically the one that's ruled by Mongols, which have a huge empire, not just in this area of the world. The Mongol dynasty and the Mongol Empire actually stretches this far too, so you can actually see that it actually encompasses the dynastic cycle here, and that would be South Central Asia and Eastern Asia. Something to know about the Mongol dynasty in the 12th century by Genghis Khan is it reached its territorial height during this age, and basically it's part of Asia extending westward to Europe, so it's huge. So anytime you see this landmass that takes over Russia and Asia, Eastern Asia, and parts of South Central Asia here, the northern parts of India, you know that's referring to the Mongol dynasty. Why is this important too? Is that if you get anything referencing land-based empires, which is a huge theme in your course, they're referencing the Mongol Empire. Okay, like that's what they're literally asking you about. Detail the land-based empire of Eastern Asia. It's Mongols. Okay, the Yuan dynasty. Look into your notes of Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde, all that jazz. That's going to be your main spot to look into, and that's what they're referencing there. So don't get thrown off. Now, if they're referencing the Tokugawa dynasty, that's the one that you're going to see coming out. That's just talking about Japan, all right? And that'll be kind of modern day Japanish, from the year 1600 to 1868, and that's basically the one area you need to know. So Tokugawa is the biggest family of the Tokugawa dynasty, and anytime they say Tokugawa, you know it's Japanese history. It's not Chinese history like the dynasties or the Qing or the Ming, Song or Wang. All right, and be clear that you know the differences between those two for your ancient Asian history. Now, the different types of trade routes are important to know. For instance, the Silk Road is something that connects, and you start your course off. It connects Eastern Asia with all the way up with Eastern Europe up until about here in this section here, and it connects even parts of Africa. So it's Africa, Europe, Asia. That's what they're talking about. Afro-Eurasia trade, land-based trade. They're usually referring to the Silk Roads. The Silk Road is not called the Silk because they just trade silk, but basically that's one of the major imports from China. Remember, it's a luxury good, so it gets nicknamed that as it connects over. And it basically interactions between these two areas from the 2nd century BC to 18th century. So it's basically east and west. And this is the main trade function of this landmass until the birth, and it's up here on this map. It's up until the birth of finding the Americas from Columbus, and then that's when the trade routes go this way. But at first, they're all here. The Silk Roads refer usually to the land-based travel over the Silk Roads, places of northern India and China, and places of Eastern Europe here. You can kind of see it. Eastern Europe here. See? Now, when you're talking about art, there's not going to be a lot, too much art in AP World History. But one thing they love to say is to give credence to Islamic culture is the idea of mosques. And mosques in Islam is important because they don't represent the same type of pictures that you see maybe in Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism. In Islam, remember, doing a focal point of the body is not something that's, it's not part of their artistic style. So they're more into handwriting and geometric patterns. So if you see something that's like a geometric pattern and they're talking about imagery and so forth, they're really referring to the ideas of Islamic patterns and geometry being a focal point of their artistic, their artwork during their time frame. So anytime you see anything geometry in artwork and they're referring to those two things, they're really referring to the Islamic Empire. Some stuff to know about Renaissance Italy. It was basically in modern day Europe, modern day Italy. If you see city-states like this section where Italy would be, you know it's talking about the Renaissance era. If you see a unified Italy, then you know you're post-1860, the unification of Italy. If you see Italy broken up like this, you know it's pre-unification of Italy. And it's just a good thing to know for history class. It gives you a good point of view for your time frames and just saying where you are in history if you have a quick map to reference. The Renaissance is important. It gives the idea of 3D perspective, more humanism, naturalistic appeal, the idea of making artwork look more real compared to the Middle Ages. That's all you really get covered with the AP World History is the idea of perspective and humanism. Those are the main things you would want to know for that section of art. You can see here how it's more realistic of people. They start to paint everyday people. It makes it more realistic. It's still religious based, but as it starts to move to the north, it starts to change to being more everyday people. But in reality, it's art that tries to look as realistic as possible as the Renaissance, and it's a revival of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans is referred to as the Renaissance. Northern Italy, you start seeing paintings actually become just everyday people, oil-based, a little bit darker, and that's basically what you would need to know for AP World History. Just a quick little snippet of Renaissance art, how it changes being more realistic, humanistic, real, and then it starts going from religion to everyday people. One thing for the Protestant Reformation and the ideas of changing from Catholicism to the Reformation would be the formation of Martin Luther, how he does these 95 Theses, these arguments, and basically he is the instigator that really defines a moment where the Catholic Church, the Great Schism, splits into two, and that's symbolic of his nailing of his thesis to the church door, which is now talked about with historians that it didn't really happen or occur, but it's a great symbolic gesture to see, because if you see this, it shows that the onus of Martin Luther being a theology teacher with having issues with the Catholic Church and really butting heads with them with his 95 Thesis, creating the door for Protestant Reformation and the Protestant Revolution that covers Europe and then the rest of the world. Now, this is a good one for AP World History because usually you're going to be referred to the Age of Exploration and also the Columbian Exchange. Here, this is a very famous one that I've seen interpreted in AP World History. It's Columbus encountering the Taínos, which was a primitive people in their view, and by Columbus in the New World. So here you see Columbus is actually, you can do a lot of hippoing or understanding or analysis of this document. It is Columbus basically kneeling down in the New World, taking onus and claiming it for Spain, with the Taínos people in the background looking almost inferior to the claiming of Columbus coming in. And then also there's, I think there's some religious icon. Yeah, there's also the idea of religion here being represented in this picture, along with the conquest of countries into the New World, which is not a new world if there's people living there. But that's the idea of what this picture is representing, the encountering of Europeans getting into the New World with ships and technology, and the people that are living there are not, quote-unquote, advanced enough in this time frame. So it's a good picture to kind of see coming up your way. Now, if you get anything with the Atlantic slave trade or travel or the triangular trade network, these are basically where you see the triangle. And one of the things to know is that it's a three-legged triangle, and then one thing that they would always ask you a question on would be the Middle Passage, which is always referencing the slaves being taken from the west coast of Africa, which is a point here, to the New World. They're doing that at first for sugar, then later on tobacco, and then later on in the late 1800s it would be cotton, but they don't really reference that. So anytime you see a triangular trade network, you know you're talking about the Atlantic slave trade. And if you don't see this, this is before Columbus. This is basically, if you see anything Columbian Exchange or anything post like that, you know it's post-Atlantic slave trade. Anything before that, you know it's before Columbus, before 1492 in history. Anytime you see anything dealing with this side of the world in world history, or transportation and trade going between these two, you know it's marking the time where now Europe has found the Americas, and that's that's Columbian, the Age of Columbus, right? The Columbian Exchange, you know, that's post-Columbus. Anything that they reference pre-Columbian, they're really talking about the time before the Atlantic trade, between these connections of trade, and they're referring to this actual area pretty much here, or isolated areas here in the Americas, but not connected. And that's the general theme. Pre-Columbian means before Columbus found the America. Now, when we're referencing the Columbian Exchange, it's different from the triangular trade network, because the Columbian Exchange is not just the goods that are being bought from Europe, manufactured to Africa to be traded with the slaves, brought over to the New World, the slaves to be used as forced labor, and then they trade raw goods back to Europe. That's a triangular trade. The Columbian Exchange is different. The Columbian Exchange is basically stuff that was only found in the Old World being brought over to the New World, one of them being diseases, like smallpox killing many people here, and Old World, New World stuff like potatoes and stuff being brought back to the Old World and being grown there. So it's not the physical transportation of the item, it's stuff that was only found and grown in one area of the world, or known about in one area, now being brought over to another area of the world and being grown or cultivated or something doing at that point too. So you see, this is the actual transference of not just goods, but the growing of stuff that was normally not found native in that area is now being introduced new good, usually goods like potatoes and stuff, crops, and then the Europeans bring germs. They also bring horses and pigs and their weaponry and stuff like that, so it's not just germs. A map that you can see here sometimes is important to know is the Treaty of Tordesillas. It's basically when the New World is found. We know that the Spanish get this side of South America and the Portuguese get this side. This is what would be modern day Brazil. They speak Portuguese here. This side they speak Spanish. Here, this is a good agricultural revolution. If you see this, you know that they're basically talking about the Dutch are the first, and then it becomes the enclosure method. If you see any type of enclosed or kind of like encapsulated land, they're talking about the enclosure method, which was basically the agricultural revolution, the second one in AP World History, and that one really spurts on the Industrial Revolution. The agricultural revolution starts with the Dutch and is later utilized by the English. They cultivate little small farming areas into one big one, and with that big one, they're able to produce more food. More food, remember, equals a population boom, more people, and then food plus people equals industry, the Industrial Revolution. So that's what they're really referring to when they show you usually land-based areas that are enclosed or talking about that. They're referencing this time that leads to the Industrial Revolution. Here, if you see any type of factories or any work or any land before and after, they're referencing, or any smokestacks or creation of here or this, they're really implementing the ideas of the Industrial Revolution. In AP World History, they're really referencing the ideas of how Industrial Revolution really affects societies, it affects the production, it affects female workers, it affects especially places in Japan and England more, but they also talk about places of Japan, how the Industrial Revolution affects those types of things. And then later on, even the second Industrial Revolution in Europe would be Germany. So those are things to think about going forward. And remember, Industrial Revolution implies technology, as how it changes the landscapes, it changes production, it changes society, and it changes people. These are some of the French Revolution things to know. You have, if you see a triangle here, this is basically talking about the inequity and inequality of the ancient regime in France. You have the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. And this is all how the structure of society in France was prior to the French Revolution. And here, if they ever give you a picture of this, they're really instituting the idea that it's basically an unfair old regime, because remember, the first and second estate, even though they don't have the majority of the population, they always, 2/3 would always outvote the third estate, meaning they did a vote out of 3. These two won 2, odd number wins, they would always outvote the other one. So even though if they had to vote, these two sections of society would always outvote and control the larger section. That was all overthrown with the French Revolution, and then it ended with Napoleon, but that's another story for another a video. But here, if you ever see any 3 estates here, especially this imagery here or here, they're basically implying that these 2 estates are riding the third estate, and even though they paid the least amount of taxes, they have the most land, and they get the most benefit out of that. Okay, so these are some political cartoons showing you the inequity of the French estates. If you see Napoleon getting crowned, that's basically signifying the end of the French Revolution. In AP World, you pretty much get this, or you would get more of the Haitian influence in France leading into it. And that's something to think about going forward, to look into the Haitian influence post-French Revolution. The age of imperialism is also one of those things to think about. You usually see some sort of imagery here of something that maybe looks like an octopus, which would be England, kind of countering and covering over different periods, parts of the world. And it shows you the empirical conquest of England at this time taking over. Here, this is a very famous picture of King Leopold II taking over and scramble for Africa. And you can see here that's a political cartoon of them actually carving out Africa. So if you see anything like this or like this, they're referencing the age of imperialism to take over of European countries over the rest of the world. You see it's taking over places like Canada and Boer's land, which would be South Africa. Here that's OVB carving up Africa as a cake with the rest of the European nations. Imperialism in China, you can see it also done here. You see that the Chinese are basically being taken over. They have them addicted to opium or selling opium to them, and you can see how these countries are trying to divide up China after this point. So it's another inference of imperialism at this time. You see this is just a Cold War map between North Korea and South Korea, and remember the 38th parallel, that's a good one to reference of modern day Cold War era. Here, if you see East Germany or West Germany, they're really referencing the Cold War era and that kind of modern time, which is kind of light on your class. Just so you know, those are some things that it's talking about. So remember, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Hopefully you liked this video, and hopefully it was helpful. And then see you next time. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.